Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is on a really intricate strategy in real estate, executing subject to acquisitions. We're talking about taking title to a property, but leaving the seller's mortgage right where it is.
And the central challenge, of course, is the due on sale clause, that ticking time bomb that lets the lender call the entire loan due. The material we're looking at proposes a highly engineered solution, using layered land trusts and specific legal entities to try and diffuse it.
Exactly. So the real question for us today is this. Does all of that legal complexity, the hybrid trusts, the LLCs, the specific power of attorney documents, does it create a truly robust and scalable framework for an investor?
Or is it just an overly fragile house of cards that's, perpetually dependent on secrecy and just hoping the lender never decides to look too closely?
My position is that the sophisticated layering is precisely what transforms that inherent risk. It turns it into a manageable, scalable protocol, and one with, frankly, proven low failure rates if you do it right.
And I'm coming at this from a different angle. I think the sheer necessity for all these complex mitigations proves the underlying fragility. I see it as an elaborate cloaking device, not a legal fortress built on solid ground.
All right, so let's start with the foundation. The robustness really begins by leveraging federal law, specifically the Garn-Spencer-Main Act. This act gives you critical exemptions for transfers into certain trusts, which, frames that initial deed transfer from the seller to the trustee as a pretty low-risk, standard estate planning move.
That's the first step, sure.
Right, but the really critical piece, the part that makes this whole thing invisible and scalable, is the unrecorded assignment of beneficial interest, the ABI. The land trust holds the title, but the ABI is what actually transfers control to the investor. And because the beneficial interest is legally personal property, not real estate, the change in ownership is completely undetectable to the lender. And it also avoids most transfer taxes, which is a huge efficiency gain. Then you add another layer of strength with what the material calls hybrid trust LLC integration. You designate your single-member LLC, ideally from a state like Wyoming or Delaware for privacy, as the beneficiary. Now you have this powerful shield where the LLC can absorb judgments without ever exposing the property itself. And this is all built for scale. You can use a master ABI to transfer beneficial interest for 10, 20 properties into a single holding LLC. When you put all 6 protections in place, the data shows the risk of the loan being called drops below 2 or 3%. That's a quantifiable, manageable risk.
Okay, but I have to challenge this whole premise that sophistication equals true robustness. I mean, the legal architecture is clever, I'll give you that, but the core fragility is still there. The structure doesn't legally negate the due on sale clause, it just helps you evade detection. That assignment of beneficial interest, it technically triggers the clause. You are 100% reliant on the lender just not doing their homework.
But the detection likelihood is extremely low.
Is it? The material is very clear that for portfolio lenders, or even worse, credit unions, that enforcement likelihood jumps to 15, maybe 25%. So the risk isn't just theoretical, it's real, and it can be substantial. And for me, the biggest weakness is the dependence on third parties. You're completely exposed to seller non-cooperation, seller bankruptcy, or even the seller's death. You're taking on all of their life risks.
But there are controls for that.
Well, let's talk about those controls. The investor has to implement these really severe contingency plans, like forcing the seller to sign an escrow deed in lieu of foreclosure. The material itself calls it the nuclear deterrent. This thing has to be held in secret by a third-party attorney, and you're relying on this coercive, maybe even legally ambiguous document just to maintain basic control. And that's before we even get to the cloaking protocols for payments and insurance. It's not a legally fortified position. It's a constant, ongoing exercise in stealth.
Let's drill down on that seller risk. You call the Deed-in-Lieu a nuclear option, but I see it as just being comprehensive. The system really does account for almost every seller contingency. For basic seller's remorse, you have a strong, specific, durable power of attorney that's explicitly limited to mortgage communications. That, plus a 5 to 10% equity holdback that's only released after 90 days of perfect payments, handles any intentional interference.
Okay.
And for the big, unintentional risks, death or bankruptcy, the strategy is designed to remove the asset from the seller's estate entirely. You can require a collateral assignment of life insurance, or even better, have the seller place their beneficial interest into their own revocable living trust, which then names your entity as the ultimate beneficiary. It solidifies control, probate court or not.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning. The very fact that you need a deed in lieu demonstrates a fundamental mistrust in the structure. It proves there's a huge systemic risk that the trust alone doesn't solve. You're relying on a legal weapon that has to be kept secret, unrecorded, because recording it would trigger the very clause you're trying to avoid.
It's a backstop.
It's a fragile backstop. The material itself points out that its enforceability is legally challenged in certain states. In places like Texas or Georgia, these deeds can be seen as voidable mortgages unless you layer on even more legal paperwork, like a separate option to purchase. If your so-called nuclear deterrent needs its own legal support system just to function, then the ironclad claim starts to look pretty thin. And let's go back to that 2 to 3% failure risk number. The material explicitly advises the investor to bond the seller against default. How can you claim the risk is transformed if you then have to buy third-party insurance against your counterparty failing? You're not eliminating the risk, you're just paying an insurer to take it.
Look, that 2 to 3% figure is the historical rate of successful loan calls after all 6 protections are in place and operational stealth is maintained. It's the failure rate of the structure against the lender, not a total cost calculation. But your point on the deed-in-lieu's enforceability is fair in some states. And that's precisely why it's the last line of defense. The primary controls are the durable POA and the AIB. The sophistication is in having multiple independent routes to maintain control. Let's shift to the other side of this then. The financial efficiency, the tax implications.
All right.
The structure is designed to deliver maximum tax advantages. The land trust is a disregarded entity, so the investor gets all the benefits of ownership, depreciation, interest deduction, the works, all while avoiding most transfer taxes because the AIB is personal property.
And the interest deduction, that's always the tricky part.
Right, and it's based on Treasury Regulations Section 1.163-1B. That reg is key. It says you can take the deduction if you are legally obligated and you actually make the payments. The investor has full control and economic liability, so they meet the threshold. Now, the compliance issue is the 1098 form, which goes to the seller's Social Security number. The recommended 1098 delegation letter is the tool for that. You send it to the servicer, tell them the beneficial owner is the one paying, and request the 1098 be sent to your entity's tax ID. It standardizes the process and gives you audit-proof documentation.
That's a compelling argument on the federal side. I'll grant you that. But you're assuming the environment for this kind of anonymity is static. And that's a flawed assumption. What about the rising exposure to county assessors? The material notes that the promise of property tax anonymity is rapidly degrading. Aggressive counties, Cook County in Illinois, a lot of California, are demanding beneficial owner disclosure forms specifically to trigger tax reassessments. We're talking a 20 to 40% likelihood of that happening in those areas.
But that's a tax risk, not a DOS risk.
Is it? To fight it, the investor has to create even more layers, listing a New Mexico or Wyoming private LLC as the beneficiary. It shows that maintaining this tax-efficient stealth isn't a one-time setup. It's an active, ongoing battle against government bodies that are getting smarter. The financial advantage relies on a level of anonymity that is demonstrably unstable.
But we have to differentiate between a state assessor trying to get more property tax revenue and a federal lender enforcing a due-on-sale clause. They're two very different risk profiles, and sophisticated investors can maintain what the material calls silent operation against the real threat, the lender. You use a professional, bonded trustee, you solve payment disruption risk with a pass-through LLC account that mimics the seller's name, you even have digitally time-stamped documents to prove when the transfer happened. These operational details turn the risk from an unknown threat into a predictable, manageable protocol.
I just can't agree with that because the detection triggers are so hard to control over time. The core vulnerability is that a truly robust system shouldn't depend on which loan servicer you happen to get. The material points to rising CFPB scrutiny, which could lead to lenders demanding financials, doing ability to repay reviews. It even admits that to mitigate this, the investor should keep 6 to 12 months of payments in a reserve account. That fundamentally hurts your return on investment.
That's just prudent risk management.
I see it as proof the structure isn't capital efficient under stress. And the central issue remains the risk that a new servicer, the material specifically names Mr. Cooper or Shell Point as being more aggressive, audits the file. That trigger is completely out of your control. If your entire investment is contingent on an external company remaining asleep at the switch, then the acquisition is fragile by definition. It's not fortified. Conclusion. So I think we've established that while the structure offers some, substantial benefits, full tax advantages, streamlined management, it is intrinsically dependent on this constant operational stealth and the hope that the due on sale clause isn't enforced. The complexity required just to stay invisible shows this is more an exercise in high-level risk management than it is true legal fortification.
I see why you think that, but let me offer a different perspective. I believe we've shown that the sophistication of the layering, the hybrid trust LLC model, the strong POA, the escrow controls, demonstrates that the risk is not just managed, it's quantifiable and mitigated to an extremely low level, less than 3% failure when deployed correctly. It gives a sophisticated investor the tools to build a scalable portfolio on very favorable terms, but only if they commit to those detailed silent operation protocols.
A high price for entry.
It is. The material provides a clear roadmap. At the end of the day, the investor has to weigh the costs, $2,000 to $5,000 per deal, against the protection offered by building this highly engineered legal fortress.